These are the top stories. Ontario government freezes salaries of public sector executives. The Ontario government has suspended salary increases for public sector senior executives, including those at school boards, universities, colleges and hospitals, effectively reinstating a wage freeze that has been in place for the better part of a decade. A directive sent on Monday to public sector board chairs, a copy of which was obtained by the Globe and Mail, said the salary restrictions will be in effect until a review of the compensation program for executives is completed by June 2019. Executives are those entitled to receive $100,000 or more in a calendar year. This is the Daily Morning Update newsletter. If you're reading this on the web, or if someone forwarded this email to you, you can sign up for Morning Update and all Globe newsletters here. BC's Trinity Western University drops mandatory covenant forbidding sex outside heterosexual marriage. British Columbia's Trinity Western University has dropped a requirement that students adhere to a community covenant that forbids sex outside of heterosexual marriage, but says it has no plans to revive its proposal for a law school. The change, announced Tuesday, follows a Supreme Court ruling in June that upheld the right of provincial law societies to reject the graduates of the proposed law school. Law societies in BC and Ontario argued the mandatory covenant amounted to discrimination against LGBTQ students. At the time of the Supreme Court decision, the Globe's editorial board wrote that the ruling struck an appropriate balance between freedom of religion and the right of regulatory bodies. Ottawa negotiating to create new statutory holiday marking painful legacy of Indian residential schools. The federal government is consulting with Indigenous groups before declaring a national statutory holiday to mark the sad and painful legacy of Canada's Indian residential schools. The holiday is expected to be known as the National Day for Truth and Reconciliation, one of the 94 calls to action of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, TRC, which spent years investigating the abuse of children at the church-run schools. After becoming a federal statutory holiday, the National Day for Truth and Reconciliation would be a day off work for federal employees. Provinces and territories would then have to amend their own labor codes if they choose to commemorate the history of their residential schools in the same fashion. Montreal joining Toronto in calls for a country-wide handgun and assault weapons ban. The city of Montreal is set to call for a country-wide ban on handguns and assault weapons, joining Toronto in pressing the Trudeau government to beef up its proposed firearms legislation. Montreal City Council is to debate a motion that will urge the federal government to prohibit weapons that are currently legal, albeit tightly regulated, at a meeting next week. The motion will also push Ottawa to impose enhanced background checks on owners and would-be owners of firearms. Got a news tip that you'd like us to look into? Email us at tips@globeandmail.com. Need to share documents securely? Reach out via Secure Drop. In case you missed, Haiti illegal border crossings from U.S. increased. The number of border crossers spiked by nearly 23% between June and July, following a brief decrease in the number of asylum seekers illegally crossing into Canada between official border posts earlier this year. The RCMP intercepted 1,634 asylum claimants along the Canada-U.S. land border in July, mostly in Quebec, according to new statistics released by the Immigration Department. The number of border crossers is up after the Liberal government touted a steady decrease in the months leading up to July. Morning markets. World stocks, emerging currencies consolidate losses as lira bounces, U.S. dollar firms. Action from Turkey's central bank pushed the lira higher for a second day on Wednesday, helping European stocks and emerging currencies consolidate recent losses, though the U.S. dollar ensconced at 13-month highs kept up the pressure on world markets. The lira bounced another 5%. Sharply extending Tuesday's gains as authorities further tightened the screws on foreigners aiming to short the currency. Around 5:30 a.m. ET, European shares were mixed, with Britain's FTSE 100 down 0.16% and France's CAC 40 off by 0.06%. Germany's DAX was in the black, gaining 0.15%. In Asia, shares finished mostly lower. Japan's Nikkei lost 0.68%. Hong Kong's Hang Seng fell 1.55%. Brent crude and West Texas Intermediate prices were both lower in early trading. The Canadian dollar was slightly weaker at 76.45 US cents. What everyone's talking about: firearms do not belong in Canada's cities. Those favoring liberty around guns will be quick to invoke the slippery slope argument in aid. If gun ownership is restricted now, what precious liberty is next? But this argument is sleight of hand. The slippery slope is an illusion that distracts us from grim realities we do face by stoking fear of an imaginary alternative bogeyman. A slippery slope is just a metaphor with an equally powerful counter-metaphor. Ice axes and crampons give all the nimbleness on a slippery slope we need to navigate safely. In other words, a single measured policy step is simply not the same as an inevitable slide into extremism. David Butt, Canada-Saudi rift. The next steps forward for Ottawa, as we have learned through our initiatives to help the Rohingya in Myanmar and to constrain the Maduro regime in Venezuela. Advancing human rights in countries that don't care is a difficult proposition. But if a feminist foreign policy and advocacy for human rights is to mean anything, we have to stand up, even if we stand alone. Colin Robertson. For an informed debate on gun policy, Canada needs more data before proposing new policy solutions to gun violence. The federal government would do well to place some priority on collecting data that elucidates the problem. Moving beyond the usual, hot-button gun debates between firearms owners and control advocates, and building national consensus on any regulatory changes, would be helped by all concerned operating from a common set of facts. Globe editorial. Living better. What to do if your flight is cancelled? First of all, don't panic. Airlines typically rebook you on the next available flight automatically. You can either ask for a full refund, which can be done through the website or hotline, or stick with a new itinerary, which might only mean a few hours delay. William Pang lists everything else you should do when worst comes to worst. For hundreds of years, it took anywhere from 4 to 8 months to reach the Pacific Ocean by boat from the Atlantic Ocean. A hazardous trip that took ships around the tip of South America. Many had eyed the Isthmus of Panama as a possible shortcut between oceans, and the French were the first to attempt to build this route. But suffering from a high mortality rate during construction, they handed over rights to build the Panama Canal to the Americans in 1904. Officially opened on this day in 1914, American engineering of the canal led to an innovative system of locks that are all filled and emptied using only gravity. As each boat is lifted into the gate, it reaches a height of 26 meters above sea level and is then transited across the 80-kilometer water bridge to access the other ocean in a trip that can usually take 8 to 10 hours. The canal has delivered on its promise of becoming a vital artery for maritime traffic, with thousands of boats passing through its gates every year. In 2016, a new wider canal opened beside the original to move the world's largest container ships and oversized ocean liners. Joanna Chisholm. If you'd like to receive this newsletter by email every weekday morning, go here to sign up. If you have any feedback, send us a note.